Buongiorno. Conoscerete oggi un architetto molto bravo dal mio punto di vista, e la cui opera, il cui lavoro non rientra negli schemi usuali che servono a decretare il successo in questa professione e che pongono di fronte tutti noi ad un problema con il quale dobbiamo confrontarci, al di là dei facili luoghi comuni, al di là di quello che siamo stati abituati a pensare sempre. In un'epoca quale quella che noi viviamo, che più di altre richiede di non affidarsi per affrontarla ai luoghi comuni, a quello che si è sempre pensato. Quello che Herz oggi vi farà vedere sono diversi e non così facilmente componibili aspetti di un lavoro variegato, di un lavoro fatto di tanti aspetti. Ed è questo ciò che mi attira di più nel leggere i suoi libri e nel guardare le sue opere. Ho avuto la fortuna di conoscere il suo lavoro quando mi pare nel 2016 ho visto alla Biennale il padiglione di un paese che non c'è, se così si può dire, il padiglione nazionale del Sahara occidentale. E la prima cosa che ho fatto visitando quel padiglione che Herz aveva organizzato è stato chiedermi: il Sahara occidentale che paese è? Naturalmente conoscevo, forse i più giovani di voi non saranno familiari con questo nome, della rivolta, della guerra in corso tra il Marocco e il Polisario, che era l'espressione armata di questo popolo che vive nel Sahara occidentale, alla fine del Marocco, verso la parte più a sud del Marocco. Ma non sapevo che ci fosse uno Stato che potesse essere rappresentato all'interno della Biennale, un National Pavilion. Ho visto poi un libro che si intitola From Camps to City, Refugee Camps of the Western Sahara. Come i campi dei rifugiati generati da questa guerra tra il Marocco e il Polisario, tra il Marocco e gli abitanti del Sahara occidentale, si sono insediati in Algeria, creando lì dei campi uguali a tanti campi, apparentemente uguali a tanti campi di rifugiati che ci sono oggi nel mondo e di cui noi conosciamo pochissimo la realtà. È una di quelle realtà dimenticate, è una di quelle realtà che ci sono e che non conosciamo e che non vediamo. Così come non vediamo che in quella terra vi è un muro di separazione tra il Marocco e il Sahara occidentale, che è lungo, Manuel, mi pare 3.200 chilometri o qualche cosa del genere, una roba enorme. Cioè lì a 2 passi dalle mete turistiche più ambite e più alla moda, vi è questa costruzione straordinaria che noi non ignoriamo. Manuel ha detto che da quella realtà, che da quei campi profughi possono derivare delle città, possono nascere delle città, che nutrono tutta la cultura che è tipica delle città e che lui frequenta. Non so se oggi ve li farà vedere, ma lui ama tessere delle bellissime stoffe, dei tappeti, con gli abitanti di quei campi, che oggi sono in Algeria, da noi perfettamente dimenticate, che vivono privi della loro capitale, privi della loro terra. E questo essere così interessato ai luoghi che non hanno terra, ai luoghi che non appartengono ad un luogo, ma che formano un luogo, è una delle condizioni del nostro tempo. Anche noi, se ci pensate bene, viviamo in un mondo senza luoghi, perché tutti i luoghi sono apparentemente uguali, per la stessa ragione per la quale noi ignoriamo che nel Sahara, che in Algeria ci sono 120.000 abitanti di questi villaggi, che sono città, che sono diventate città, lontane dalla loro terra, dal loro luogo. Un altro dei libri che mi è piaciuto moltissimo, che Herz ha scritto, è African Modernism. Che cosa è successo nei paesi africani dopo la conquista dell'indipendenza dei paesi come il Ghana, il Senegal, il Kenya e via dicendo? Che cosa è successo in città come Nairobi, che lui ha poi studiato? E come vediamo noi questi luoghi? Come questi luoghi hanno assunto i modelli che provenivano dall'Europa e li hanno trasformati in gran parte vi si sono adeguati. E che effetti tutto ciò ha prodotto? Vi è un grandissimo libro di Alberto Tenenti che ripercorre la storia dell'Occidente, la storia dell'Europa sostanzialmente, dall'epoca medievale, da San Bonaventura, fino più o meno alla Rivoluzione francese. E Tenenti, che era un grandissimo storico, ha introdotto una categoria fondamentale. Il mondo, come noi lo vediamo, come noi lo conosciamo, si divide tra un mondo prestatistico e un mondo statistico. Un mondo che conosce, che non conosce, che non sa di che quantità, che non sa misurare le quantità di cui è fatto, che non sa quanti abitanti vivono in quel paese, in quella nazione, in quella città, che non sa quanto denaro vi si produca, che non sa quanti siano i morti che ogni anno si devono contare in una determinata area. Prestatistico. Prima cioè di tutti quei dati che noi utilizziamo per conoscere il mondo in cui viviamo. Poi, dal 600 in poi, sempre più accuratamente noi ci siamo contati. Abbiamo contato noi stessi, abbiamo contato tutto quello che c'era, abbiamo dato dei numeri. Se guardiamo all'Africa, se guardiamo a tanti paesi lontani dall'Europa, noi forse ci accorgiamo che stiamo entrando in un'epoca post-statistica, in un'epoca in cui non è più possibile contare, che le metropoli africane sono dei luoghi dove non valgono le nostre statistiche, dove non si può conoscere la realtà dei dati che permettono di governarle, e che quindi siamo in preda di un processo che non siamo più capaci di conoscere. Questo vale in generale, però, anche per la nostra vita. I nostri modelli non ci sono più, i nostri riferimenti non ci sono più. Questo vale anche per la nostra architettura, per il nostro modo di farla, di affrontarla, che implica una continua capacità di spostarsi, di capire la diversità delle opportunità, delle occasioni, che non vi è più uno stile che ci tenga insieme, che non vi è più un comune denominatore. Chi come Herz ha viaggiato questo mondo, l'ha conosciuto, chi conosce quanto in esso permanga di valori che meritano di essere continuamente rivissuti e reinterpretati, e quanto difficile sia viverlo, è in grado più di altri di capire questa condizione di tutti coloro che trasformano con le loro opere il mondo in cui viviamo. Uno degli aspetti che più mi interessa e avvince nell'opera di Herz è proprio questa sua capacità di non essere mai fermo, di non avere uno stile, di confrontarsi continuamente con condizioni diverse l'una dall'altra. Lo vedrete quando vi farà vedere le sue opere, che sono mobili, che hanno un aspetto e poi cambiano. Gli involucri, come nella Ballet Mécanique, che tanto mi piace, una semplice casa di appartamenti con un impianto sostanzialmente tradizionale, ma che si apre, si chiude, si trasforma continuamente. E quello che più mi diverte è che questa casa, fatta di un involucro che è mobile, che si allarga, che allarga lo spazio delle abitazioni a secondo del movimento dell'involucro stesso, bene, questa casa cambia anche di colori, cambia completamente di aspetto. Questa sua monocromia apparente che poi diventa invece appunto come in un ballet mécanique, piena di colori. Poi vedrete la sinagoga di Magonza, di Mainz. Magonza è una di quelle terre particolari per la cultura ebraica. È una terra davvero molto molto unica. Worms, tutti lì stavano gli Askenaziti, la grande cultura askenazita. E come affrontare il tema di una sinagoga che è una tipologia edilizia che è sradicata, che è l'epitome della sradicatezza di cui prima parlavo, che non ha un tipo? Come affrontare il tema di una sinagoga che è formata, ci ricorda De Benedetti, da una triade: l'assemblea. La vera sinagoga era una piazza, originariamente la vera sinagoga è una piazza. Dalla lettura, la Torah, lo srotolo del rotolo sacro, e la parola, e la mediazione della parola. Come affrontare questa cosa strana che esclude ciò che è centrale invece in tutti i nostri luoghi di culto? In tutti i nostri luoghi di culto vi è un centro, vi è un altare. Nella sinagoga no. E il suo spazio è continuamente mutevole, come quello di una piazza, appunto. Ma è centrale il ruolo della scrittura. La sinagoga è scrittura. Si legge ad alta voce. E poi scende Mosè a spiegare che cosa ha detto Dio, la parola. Ma è una parola ad alta voce che si pronuncia nella piazza della sinagoga. E questa piazza, questa sinagoga di Mainz, è fatta come una iperbolica scrittura, fatta di lettere gigantesche, di lettere ingrandite. E l'altra cosa veramente impressionante per me nel piano di quella sinagoga è che quella sinagoga non è chiusa da nessuna parte, è davvero una piazza, uno spazio che si attraversa. E poi vedrete qualche cosa che, dovrebbe ci fa un po' meditare. Ed è un'altra sinagoga fatta apparentemente in maniera completamente diversa, ma in realtà seguendo questo concetto. È una piccola sinagoga costruita a Kiev, pochi mesi prima che iniziasse la guerra che tutti i giorni noi vediamo. In un luogo particolare, Babin Yar, mi pare che fosse, tra il 29 e il 30 settembre del 1941, i nazisti uccisero lì 33.731 persone in 2 giorni. La Sesta Armata, la famosa Sesta Armata, quella che il 2 febbraio del 43, 2 anni dopo nemmeno, si sarebbe arresa a Stalingrado, era entrata a Kiev. 10 giorni dopo c'è questo eccidio terribile, per diverse ragioni. È raccontato dal comandante delle truppe specializzate in queste operazioni tedesche che quant'era difficile far sì che i soldati resistessero più di 4 o 5 ore a sparare ciascuno di loro un colpo a una vittima, perché li hanno uccisi tutti sparandogli. È un racconto di Goebbels, il terribile comandante di quelle truppe. E non erano soli i tedeschi. A Kiev i pogrom, l'antisemitismo erano una parte costante della natura della vita religiosa e politica di quel paese. Kiev, l'Ucraina, era uno dei luoghi dove i conflitti erano stati più forti. Kiev, l'Ucraina, avevano alimentato 2 divisioni di SS. È una storia terribile, ma che bisogna conoscere prima di guardare il nostro tempo come se fosse così facilmente divisibile tra ciò che è bene e ciò che è male. Ma la cosa incredibile di Babin Yar, e Babin Yar è il nome di una gigantesca forra dove questi 33.300 ebrei, corpi di ebrei vennero ammassati e poi dopo nei mesi successivi se ne aggiunsero altri 120.000 ed erano ebrei, ed erano gipsi, ed erano oppositori politici e via dicendo. Babin Yar venne coperta di terra e questa forra nella storia, a partire dal 30 settembre del 1941, è sempre stato un luogo dove i disastri, le catastrofi, la ferocia dell'uomo è stata nascosta sotto la terra da parte dei tedeschi, che poi scappando tirano fuori quei corpi e tentano di bruciarli e poi arrivano i sovietici e li ricoprono di nuovo e di nuovo e di nuovo, quasi a nascondere questo retaggio che noi che noi, che gli uomini hanno lasciato in quella terra. E per questo pensare quella storia è utile, opportuno, anche per capire quello che noi oggi viviamo. Coperta, questa forra è stata coperta. Fin quando finalmente, dopo infinite storie, e ciascuna di esse interseca a quello che noi oggi vediamo, e sarebbe lunghissimo spiegarle tutte, lì nel 2022 Manuel Herz ha costruito una piccolissima sinagoga. È un edificio, è un cubo, no, un parallelepipedo. È un parallelepipedo di legno su una piccola piattaforma, senza avere nessun tipo di remora nell'utilizzare soluzioni formali, stilistiche, che sembrano ingenue, ma perché è ingenuo tutto il mondo che si raccoglie in una sinagoga che è una piazza? Cosa c'è di luogo più dell'ingenuità di una piazza, di una sinagoga? Ma quella che lui ha concepito è appunto un parallelepipedo di legno che si apre. Si apre come un libro e al suo interno contiene una fittissima decorazione, basata tutta sull'assenza di ciò che lì viene evocato, cioè la presenza non della parola di Dio, ma di Dio. La parola di Dio è lì scritta, ma Dio sappiamo che in una sinagoga non c'è. Questa non so se questa sinagoga sia sopravvissuta a quello che adesso sta succedendo intorno a Babignara, a Kiev e via dicendo. Io me lo auguro, perché è uno degli edifici che più sommessamente interpreta l'enormità delle colpe che noi abbiamo nei confronti della storia. Grazie.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you. I feel so honored to be received in such a beautiful and poetic way. Thank you so much for this wonderful and beautiful introduction. I'm really blessed. And thank you so much for your interest in coming, in listening to me. What I want to show you in the next, 45 minutes or so, is a selection of projects. I will focus specifically on 3 projects that, for me, maybe show a little bit the range of my practice. And they all, in a way, have to do with life. What you see in the background is a little bit of a teaser, and I want to use the first minute or so to speak a little bit how we approach architectural projects. But let me say one more word about the title. It's actually a translation of a Hebrew, let's say, toast. No, you say before you drink with your friend a glass of wine or a glass of vodka, you say lechaim, to life. And in a way, it's a beautiful blessing or toast. And you celebrate life. And I think in a way that is something that architecture should do. That's maybe the central, most important thing that architecture should do, is to celebrate life. So the projects that I will show you try to do that in a way. One is about life, how life is being born, created. One is in fact about death. Francesco mentioned it already, but maybe it is also about life. And the third one is about life in exile, life in an environment where you're not sure of your environment. What you see in the background, and let me start with that, is another project, the fourth project. I will start with these images because they show a little bit how we try to approach architecture. When we get a commission, we always think, how can we kind of turn a project around? How can we question conventions? How can we question a program or question the given? So in this case, we were given the task to design a multi-family home, 5 apartments in a neighborhood of Zurich, just close to the Lake of Zurich, close to this existing historical building. And it's almost like a villa, but we try to turn it around completely and in a way use the footprint, exactly the footprint of this kind of classical end 19th century villas, but transform it into a completely different building and actually a building that can transform. So something that we think is very static, is very kind of given, can we turn it into a certain kind of dynamic phenomena that can close completely like, I don't know, technical facility building of the Swiss telecom maybe facilities. When it's all closed from the inside, it has these almost painting-like windows, and then it can open into the garden and transform completely. Anyway, this is just a kind of, let's say, a teaser to show that we never start with a solution. We never start with a design even. We never start with a form, but we start by thinking about how can we question the program? How can we turn it around? How can we question these conventions? Because often conventions are boring, are often also wrong, and give you limitations that maybe it is interesting to undermine. Anyway, let me start. Let me start properly. Maybe also something that brings these projects together is the topic of materiality. And I guess we're in an environment where, in this case, ceramic as a central material is being discussed. And in fact, I will start with a project where ceramic is very important. This topic of materiality, we try to use it in a conceptual way where it really addresses the core interest of what we want to achieve with an architectural project. I hope this will become clear in the next couple of minutes. Let's go to Mainz. Mainz is a city in central Germany, close to Frankfurt. It's not a very famous city, it's not a very important city nowadays, but it has a very, very long history dating back to the Romans, and in fact it is also a city that is very, very central to the history of the Jewish religion. Mainz looks quite like a happy place in this drawing, in this etching that you see here. It's a place of book binding, of a book production, of course. Gutenberg was born and lived and worked in Mainz. So writing, the distribution of knowledge is kind of central to the city, and we thought this is very influential, or it's very interesting. But in the case of Judaism, we go back even further in history. Around 1,000 years ago, Mainz was maybe the most important city for the Jewish religion because the wisest rabbis lived in Mainz. The rabbis that had an incredible influence on how the religion shaped, how the religion kind of saw itself, lived and worked in Mainz. This is unfortunately in German, the text, but it's especially this Rabbi Gershom ben Yehuda, who lived exactly 1,000 years ago in Mainz, who was reading and interpreting especially the Talmud. The Talmud is, let's say, the second book. You have the Torah, the Bible, and then you have the Talmud, which is the second book that is central to the Jewish religion. it's not a small book, it's about 30,000 pages, and it's mostly, let's say, teachings about everyday life. And Gershom Ben Yehuda was one of the let's say, researchers of this Talmud, and it was studied and researched in Mainz, and from Mainz, his teachings, his decisions influenced the whole Jewish world. So he was given a kind of a nickname, Me'or HaGolah in Hebrew. It's called Light of Diaspora. Diaspora is exile, so the Jews living outside of Israel, the Jewish world outside of Israel, and he was given this name because his teaching and his wisdom was so big that he kind of gave light to all of Judaism outside of Israel, to the whole diaspora, to the whole of exile. And I think this is beautiful because it is showing us a kind of a level of culture that is important until today, and that overpasses and that goes beyond any kind of tragedy, even, let's say, the tragedy of the 20th century, the Holocaust. And this is something that I wanted to celebrate. Let's go into architecture. We have a very specific site. We have the location of the previous synagogue, a synagogue that was destroyed in 1938. This was the site given to me in a competition to develop a new proposal. It was this synagogue that you see here on the screen was destroyed in 1938. A small, let's say, office building was built on this place, and then in the early 2000s, a competition was launched to design a new synagogue, and I was invited to participate, and I thought, let's make it an homage to this rabbi. Let's call the building also Light of Diaspora. And my first thought was, and this is the site that you see here in the image, in the aerial, that usually when we think about religious buildings, we imagine religious buildings as creating an aura, creating a certain kind of authority by their urbanistic placement. You would normally place a religious building with a big square in front of it, and the bigger the square, the more important the building, the more important the church or the synagogue or the mosque. And we know, of course, these examples of religious buildings that have an incredibly vast space in front of them, and thereby they create authority. And I thought, maybe this is not the right approach. You have a neighborhood, you have an urban neighborhood that is defined by this, by these perimeter blocks. 19th century urbanism. No, the houses follow the lines of the street. Very proper urbanism. And I thought maybe it's much more interesting to make a religious building that follows exactly the same kind of strategy, urban strategy, that comes as close to the street and as close to public space as possible, that truly becomes a public building and not a building that tries to play on authority. So in a way, that's exactly what we did. We designed a building that is very sculptural, yes, but that comes as close as possible to public space, to pedestrian life, to street life. That follows also exactly kind of the parallel lines of the street to kind of reshape proper streetscapes. It is oriented towards the east, towards symbolically standing for Jerusalem, and has this, let's say, sculptural profile. It consists of many different functions. It's not only a praying space, it's not only a synagogue, it's also a community center with a performance space, with offices, with kitchen and so on, but it's kind of, this is the synagogue, this is the auditorium and so on. But it creates a certain kind of continuous up and down, up and down. And for me, this was important for many, many reasons. I wanted to create a building that is high, so that reaches kind of the height of the neighboring buildings. But I also wanted to create a volume that plays with a certain kind of, let's say, tension. a volume that orients the synagogue, the praying space, straight towards Jerusalem. So this is kind of direction towards Jerusalem. But it also captures the light, symbolically, let's say, the light coming from Jerusalem, and brings the light straight into the center of the space. Because very different from churches, in synagogues, the center of the space is important. You bring the Bible from a cabinet into the center of the space, and you read it from the center. And I wanted to make the light shine on this center. When we look at the facade, the kind of dimensionality became a topic that we kind of pursued. Dimensionality in many, many different, let's say, variations and ways, because I wanted to create a building that deals with the topic of writing, letters, and in a way there is a certain kind of belief in Judaism, one could say, that the world is constructed out of letters, constructed out of words. And this kind of corrugated or serrated surface is almost like an inscription, a carving into stone. It's ceramic, so it's like burnt stone. It's a carving into stone, almost like the earliest forms of writing, which creates a three-dimensional surface. And then we play with dimensionality, where we have a pattern that is concentric. The windows are the center points of these concentric patterns. So you have an illusion of dimensionality, and of course you have the reality of dimensionality through this kind of triangular sections. And then I was thinking of the kind of material that we could produce this with. What kind of material would be good, would be logical to use to actually create this facade. And it turned out that ceramic is the best material to produce it, because what you do with ceramic is it's almost like in the morning when you use toothpaste, you squeeze it through a circular opening. And that's exactly how you produce this kind of ceramics. You have a mouthpiece, an opening, in this case it's triangular, and you squeeze clay through it. And with this clay and with this mouthpiece, you can create like 10,000 meters of ceramic pieces. And even though the geometry of the facade is very irregular, you only need one mouthpiece, you only need one shape to create or to solve all the irregularities of the facade, because the irregularities are then in these kind of, let's say, angles where two lines meet. And this is very easy to cut on site. So in fact, using ceramic was a very efficient way to solve the complex geometry of this very sculptural building, and it only takes one kind of element, one basic element to cover the whole building with ceramic. And of course another, and I don't want to sound like I'm making an advertisement for ceramic, but one fantastic quality of the ceramic is this kind of glazedness that is green in this case. We chose the color because we liked it. So it's almost like an arbitrary, or it's a choice of let's say, personal taste. But what is beautiful about it is that it constantly changes color. When the sun is hidden behind clouds, it becomes very dark. It can almost become black, but there's always white through the reflection. And when the sun comes out, it almost kind of explodes in a rainbow of greens and blues and yellows because of this kind of glazed color. I don't want to bore you with kind of technicalities. This is a technical drawing just for the hanging of the different tiles, but it shows you how maybe technical drawings can also have a certain kind of aesthetic. The whole building is built of concrete. The concrete was constructed in a way that is almost, let's say, dangerous. It had, of course, a beautiful roughness once it was finished. Now, as architects, we love this kind of rough aesthetic. The client maybe less, but we fall in love with this purity. And then we applied the ceramic facade onto it, and the way you do it is a kind of in different layers with a substructure. Even the substructure has a aesthetic power. And then in a quite, let's say, time-consuming way, about 100,000 pieces of these tiles were fixed and mounted until you get the final result of this ceramic facade. And I think here in these kinds of images it becomes very visible, this kind of play of dimensionality, play of three-dimensionality, play of perspectives, of multiple perspectives that are almost kind of contradicting each other, playing with each other, confusing the viewer whether we are looking onto a flat surface or onto a three-dimensional surface. When we go inside, we have the praying space. And here I wanted again to kind of work with the topic of writing. We have this, first of all, this horn-like space. It's a reference to the, in Hebrew it's called shofar. It's the horn of a, what's the English word? Not a goat, but anyway, something like a goat. And you blow it. You blow it actually on Rosh Hashanah, New Year, which was 2 days ago in the Jewish calendar. And it's like this horn-like space that brings the light into the center of the space, as I mentioned before. That even the visitors from the other religion were quite in awe, were quite, let's say, struck when they looked into it. But on all the surfaces, and you can start to see it here in this photograph, on all the surfaces, the walls, the ceilings, the roofs and so on, there's many, many Hebrew letters. In fact, there's 1 million Hebrew letters in a very, very dense, let's say, mosaic. It's stucco work. 1 million Hebrew letters that are like an unreadable ocean, a sea, an ocean of writing, as if all the words of the Bible and the Talmud have come together to be shown on the walls. And sometimes this high density becomes a bit less, and text becomes readable. And these, what you can read, if you read Hebrew, are some of the kind of the main poems and the main blessings of the Jewish religion, and they are especially kind of religious poetry that was written in Mainz 1,000 years ago, that is written onto the walls. So let's say the cultural production, the cultural production of early medieval Mainz is written onto these walls. So this, for example, is religious poetry. It's a poem that speaks about the love to the Bible, but it uses a metaphor, and it's in fact a poem that declares love to the beauty of the women, and it describes the women in a very, let's say, visual language, so that there is a quite, if you read Hebrew, that there's a quite, sometimes even explicit poetry written onto the walls of the synagogue. It's all done in stucco, in gypsum. The letters are about 5 centimeters big. The letters are smooth, and the space in between the letters is rough, and we coated it with a slightly metallic paint, slightly reflective. And the effect that this achieves is that there's a kind of a flickering, there's a dynamic that is introduced. Sometimes when you turn your head, the surface of the letters is dark and the space in between is bright, and then you turn your head again and the surface of the letters is kind of switches, becomes bright, and the space in between becomes dark. So depending on the time of the day, depending on how the light falls, depending on how you look, the space always changes, the colors always changes, and the reflection always changes. And in a way, this is a little bit similar to the quality of the material quality of the ceramic. Now it also flickers, it also changes colors, changes darkness to light, light to dark. By the way, I was, when I designed it, I was a bit, I don't know how to say, maybe I was a bit disappointed by all the trees that are standing, covering the building. Now this is kind of the vain architect. I want the people to see the building and not the trees. Afterwards, of course, I understood how stupid this thought was, and how beautiful trees and buildings merge into each other, because the leaves of the trees have exactly the same kind of quality of reflecting, of flickering. It becomes almost like camouflage. No, it becomes buildings and trees merge into each other. It's a little bit like Tiger Lady. No, this kind of camouflage effect that I think is quite beautiful. The building in a gray day, and the building in a sunny day, and an even sunnier day. What I observed when I was sitting on this urban square in front of it, I observed a couple of people being attracted to the building, and they didn't quite understand what is the materiality, and they moved closer, and they moved closer and closer and closer, and started to touch it. And I don't know how synagogues, if you know synagogues, but in Germany, this is always a tricky thing, because in Germany, synagogues are always protected by police. There's always a kind of a security installation around them. There's always observation. There's always cameras. So people are often afraid to come close to synagogues. They have a certain kind of hesitation. What happened because of the materiality was that people become very, very interested. They become curious. They go closer and closer and closer, and they start touching the building, and they start kind of caressing the building. And as soon as you touch a building, you lose this kind of authority, you lose the respect in a good way, and I mean this in a good way. You become very at ease with it. And I thought, this is beautiful, no? That people have no hesitation of coming close to the architecture and touching it. And this is really the power of materiality that does this. And this was extremely important for the kind of how the building sits in an urban setting, and this connects to my very first thoughts, that it does not want to construct a fake authority by kind of grandeur, by a vast urban space, but it wants to become a building that people feel very comfortable with. And this was maybe let's say, the biggest achievement of that. Let's change places. We go to the African continent. Francesco already mentioned that I have let's say, a certain kind of interest with the African continent. I think it's a place that is, it's a continent that is vast, first of all, and that is mostly misunderstood. And for me, I wanted to use, in a way, architecture as a tool to investigate a region that is unfamiliar to me, and by now has maybe become a little bit more familiar, but I wanted to use architecture to question some of our preconceptions that we have with this vast continent. So a couple of years ago, I received an email by a foundation, by the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation. So it's Joseph Albers, the Bauhaus artist, and he's of course dead, and his foundation, the foundation that kind of takes care of the work of him and his wife Annie. They are very invested, especially in Senegal. They do a lot of support in the health region, in the topic of health in Senegal. And they sent me an email saying, Manuel, we want to invite you to participate in a competition. You are one of 10 architects invited to develop a design for a new hospital in the city of Tambacounda. Please be aware that you will not become rich with this. In fact, you almost will not earn any money, but it's for a good cause, and you will help the people of Tambacounda. And I was thinking, should I participate, should I not? Where's Tambacounda? I had no clue. I had been to Senegal a couple of times, but I had not heard of the city. It's a large city, 100,000 inhabitants in the east of Senegal. And I was thinking, should I participate or not? And in the end, I wrote an email back saying, Dear Albers Foundation, thank you so much for the invitation. I feel honored, but I will not participate for the following reason. I think the competitive approach in this case is not the right approach. I think 10 architects sitting in Basel, London, Paris, Berlin, New York, inventing a solution for a region that they have never traveled to, inventing a solution for doctors that they have never spoken to, a solution for a climate that they don't know, for a culture that they don't know, for patients that we have never met. I think the competitive approach is not the right approach. I think we cannot sit in Basel, Paris, London, New York and develop a solution. It just doesn't work. For me, a collaborative approach would have been much better. I'm sure you will receive good contributions in the competition. Thank you, goodbye. 3 hours later, the telephone rings. The head of the foundation calls me and says, Manuel, you really, your email points to a big problem. Let's meet. Out of that developed a direct commission, and it was really not intended. But sometimes declining a project can lead very much to that project. So for me, it was an important lesson. And a few weeks later, we find ourselves in the streets of Tambacounda. Tambacounda, as I said, is a large city, 100,000 inhabitants. It is still has many rural qualities. It's not very, let's say, it's not commercialized. This is the market area. There's no supermarkets. There are absolutely no shopping malls whatsoever. This is where you do your shopping. There is an existing hospital. The hospital was built in the 1980s, in fact, by Italian architects. It looks very nice. It has these circular buildings. It is decent architecture, but the condition is very, very bad. This is the kind of condition of the patients' rooms. It's very unhygienic. It is extremely poorly equipped. It is extremely hot. There's no air conditioning, and it is overcrowded. And you can almost make a very simple equation. If the hygiene is bad, if there's big overcrowding, there's more death. No, the kind of level of health quality equates to maternal health, to childbirth, how many kids survive, how many women survive, and so on. The climate is very harsh. This is the rainy season. There's 2 months of rain. There's 10 months of dry weather, no rain whatsoever. Temperature is about 40, 45 degrees. It's one of the hottest cities of Africa. And then we came there and we thought, okay, before we start with anything, we should start with research. So what we did was a couple of weeks of just looking at things, looking at the local culture, looking at how buildings are being built there, looking at climate, looking at flora and fauna, the plants, the trees, at the hospital itself, and so on. So we put it all together in a big 250-page book that you see here. We spoke to the doctors, we interviewed them. What do you actually need? How are things arranged? What is the flow of logistics? What is the flow of patients? How do things move through the hospital? We sat down with them and we asked them, in fact, how would you organize a hospital? How would you, and this is, I don't know if I mentioned it, it's the maternity and pediatric clinic, so for mothers and children, the clinic that I was supposed to build. And we asked them to draw it themselves. And this is exactly the sketches of the doctor of pediatrics and the doctor of maternity. And in a way, we just translated it into slightly more organized kind of diagrams. And only once we had kind of thought we understood what is actually needed, we started with design. We had a site. The site was given to us. So you see these kind of circular existing buildings. And then we started developing volumes, and in a way the first thoughts was we make a building that is as long as possible and as thin, as narrow as possible. The length is a function of communication, or a function of, let's say, the social situation, condition of this hospital. Because when people come to the hospital to give birth or because they're in need of an operation, they usually don't come on their own, but they come with their whole family. And often they come from the villages and they stay there a couple of days with their whole family, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. So there's a lot of people in this hospital always, and they need space. They need space to wait. They need space to talk. They need space to sit. So the longer the building is, the more you have corridors, the more you have waiting spaces, the more you have these kind of collective spaces where you can linger, where you can wait, where you can talk. And we wanted to create these kind of many, many social spaces. And the thinness, the narrowness of the building is a function of climate. We wanted to create a building that needs as little air conditioning as possible, where air conditioning only is needed in the operation section and the intensive care unit. And everything else should be naturally ventilated. And how do you naturally ventilate a building? Through what we call brise-soleil in French, this kind of perforated walls. As soon as you have temperature differences, air moves, and shadow and sun create temperature differences, so you automatically create current, you create air movement, and the air moves from outside into the corridor, moves through the walls, into the rooms, and out again. And hot air can rise up through openings in the ceiling. It's a kind of double-layered ceiling. The sun is reflected on the outer layer, and the hot air can move out through the inner layer. So the building, in a way, becomes its own climate machine. And this is all dependent on this brise-soleil, on this perforated wall, which is dependent on a perforated brick. So we needed to invent a brick. We spent a lot of time investigating on the shape, on the geometry of the brick, and we came up with this kind of proposal for the brick, and we wanted to test it. And then we did something that is very typical to the kind of European mindset of an architect. No, when we test things, we make a test facade. I'm sure you are familiar with this. In the process of constructing or in the process of design, especially when it's a slightly larger building, You make what is called a mock-up or a test facade. So you build a section of the facade, I don't know, 2-3 meters wide, 2-3 meters high, to see it in real scale with the real materiality, with the real colors. Is it nice? Is it not nice? And so we wanted to do exactly that, and we sent a drawing of this test facade to the construction company in Senegal, in Tambacounda, and said, okay, here's the drawing. It's a wall 10 meters wide, 3 meters high. Please build it. This is the design of the brick. Please build it somewhere on the territory of the hospital, in a corner, kind of northwest. There's space to build this test facade. And then after a few weeks, we receive a photograph. We receive exactly this photograph, and we think, it doesn't really look like what we sent the guys in Tambacounda. It looks a bit different, and it doesn't look like it's standing on the site. It's standing somewhere completely different. What's going on? And he's clearly building more here. And then 2 weeks later, we receive photos of the finished facade, and we were surprised. And what had happened was that the guy of the construction company thought, it's so stupid to build a test facade that you look at and then tear it down a few hours later, and it's what a waste. He knew that a village 50 kilometers south of Tambacounda needed a school. So he builds the test facade exactly in that village, extends it with 3 additional walls, puts a roof over it, and voila, you have a school. And now this village has a beautiful school that is perfectly ventilated. We can come again and again and again and look at the test facade many, many more times, and nothing is wasted. And I thought, this is such a beautiful kind of, let's say, collaboration. No, it's a hybrid building, it's a hybrid function, hybrid program, and hybrid authorship. And something much more beautiful comes out of it than I could have ever imagined it. This, in fact, is the head of this construction company. It's Dr. Mageba. He has a super cool shirt and is a very cool guy. In fact, he is a doctor, a medical doctor, who practices medicine in the villages by daytime. And because he started to construct medical facilities in the villages, he understood that he has a talent to organize construction sites. So by daytime, he's a doctor, and by evening, he organizes our construction site. Really a genius. This is the brick. The brick is made on site. It's not clay, it's not burnt, it's cement-based. So you have one shape, this one form. With this one form, we made 50,000 bricks. Well, I didn't, but the workers did. It's just compressed. Let's see if we can. So you kind of stomp it to the ground, and with this one shape, the workers produced 50,000 bricks that all have the same geometry because they all come from the same base, and through which we slowly constructed the hospital. It is not only the hospital, because we didn't want to focus on a single building. We thought it's a kind of a wrong concept to say the building is the main thing, and it's all about the single building. So we wanted to expand and contextualize the hospital. So what we've now started to do is we have started to build staff housing, so for the employees of the hospital. Tambacounda is not an attractive city in the minds of the Senegalese. They are often educated in Dakar, in the capital, in the west, at the ocean, which is cooler, better climate, much better pay, and then maybe they have to do 1 year of medical training in Tambacounda. And the first opportunity to go back to Dakar they use. So we thought if we offer them at least good apartments, good housing, then they will stay longer. And then the medical quality also increases. So we are in the process of constructing staff housing, which is comfortable and higher quality. When my wife and me got married 2 years ago, we asked our wedding guests not to give us gifts, but to contribute to let's say, a fund. And with this fund, we started to build the first playground in Tambacounda. The playground is just next to the hospital, so that when people are lying in the hospital, they will hear the laughter of kids. It's the first playground in eastern Senegal. And I think this kind of happiness of kids is incredibly important. And Dr. Mageba, the guy that you saw before in the cool shirt, he really started to like the brick. And when he was asked to build kindergartens, he didn't even ask me. He just started to use the brick for himself and started to build a few kindergartens exactly also using this perforated brick. So the brick has started to almost have a life of its own, to become an independent agent of its own and create a new vernacular. All the construction workers come from the region, come from the villages. And when you put it all together, it's not only an architectural intervention, it's not only kind of making one building and then saying, okay, thank you, let's go. But it's really almost like a territorial approach, or it's an approach that goes from the scale of a building to the scale of the territory. And I think this is one of the reasons why the building has a certain kind of success, or why it became also accepted locally. Early this year, it was completed, handed over to the hospital, and we went there. I went there, in fact, with my 1.5-year-old son. It was our first kind of father and son trip. Very beautiful, and he totally loved it. I loved it, and the climate is really better in these. It's very hard to convey through photography that this is outside 45 degrees and inside maybe only 35 degrees, that there's a kind of comfortable air stream flowing through the building, but you have to believe me. At 8 o'clock in the morning, it turns into a disco ball, and in the late afternoon, at sunset, it lies quite elegantly in this very horizontal urban landscape of Tambacounda. Okay, we move location again. I take you to Kiev, I take you to Babin Yar. And that's the kind of the last project I will show. 81 years ago, September 1941, Nazis, Wehrmacht, SS soldiers enter Kiev. They are actually welcomed quite happily by the local population. They take over Kiev in a matter of days. A few days later, on September 27, 1941, the Nazi and Wehrmacht soldiers distribute leaflets, little posters, throughout the city, telling the Jewish population of Kiev to assemble on the morning hours of 29th of September in one particular place in Kiev, on the western edge of Kiev, and to take a suitcase, their identification papers, and their few personal belongings. All the Jews thought that they would be resettled. In fact, they were all shot. They were all killed. 35,000, almost 35,000 Jews were killed within 48 hours, were shot. These photographs are the only historic evidence that we have of this. They were taken by an SS army photographer a few days after the mass murder, and they show you the topography, this kind of ravine, the steep topography of this site on the western edge of Kiev. They show you the site of the mass murder and some of the evidence of the personal belongings. Over the next couple of weeks, Francesco had already mentioned it, another almost 100,000 people are shot on this site. It's the worst mass killing of the 20th century, and it's really one of the ground zeros of European history. The site is located on the northwestern edge of Kiev, or what used to be the northwestern edge of Kiev. By now, Kiev has grown much beyond it, and the area has become a very weird place. It's partially a memorial site. It's partially just a park, a Sunday park where you go and do your picnic. There is a sports center, there is a TV tower, there is even a police shooting range, very macabre. There's kebab stores. It's a very weird, let's say, mishmash of different programs by now. But the topography is still very strong, and in a way what you see here are the trees growing out of the corpses of mass murder 81 years ago. I was commissioned to design a synagogue in October 2020. I received a telephone call, and it was a direct commission. I was given a site. This is the first kind of memorial that actually commemorates the killing of these 35,000 Jews, which was set up in 1990. 30 years ago, and I was given the site in between the trees, and I was thinking, how can we as an architect develop a response to one of the most cruel events of humanity? No, this really shows us our dark side, how bad we can become as people. How can we develop an architectural response? And maybe the intuitive answer would be to make something that is very heavy, that is very dark. And we know this in a way. No, there's a lot of Holocaust memorials that play exactly on this kind of trope, that play exactly on this kind of quality of heaviness, somberness, darkness, sadness. The Holocaust Memorial in Berlin by Eisenman, for example. And it's almost an equation. The more dramatic and catastrophic the crime, the heavier the monument. So it's always out of concrete or very, very heavy stone. And I thought, this is not the right approach. This is not correct. We should turn it around. And I was thinking of these books. These pop-up books, we know them. We know them, for example, from museum stores. And in a way, there's this kind of intuitive fascination with them. No, we can't resist to open them. And in a way, I would claim they are very similar to what a synagogue is. Because what do we do in a synagogue? We come to a synagogue and we open a book. We open this book together. It's the book of prayers or the Bible. We open it and we read it. And while reading it, this book opens a kind of a world, a universe of stories to us. Stories of love, stories of righteousness, stories of morality, stories of history. And we get lost in these stories. And in a way, these pop-up books do exactly the same. No? They open a universe to us, literally, and we put our nose into them and get lost and get fascinated. So my thought was, let's do that. Let's make a building that can really open up, literally, 100 square meters. It's a big building for this kind of complicated technology. I don't know if I'm being boring or too slow, but I see some people leaving. And then we looked at the tradition of synagogue architecture in Ukraine. And there's a fascinating history of synagogue architecture from the 16th, 17th, 18th century that is painted inside They have all been destroyed. Only photographs, historic photographs remain. And there's a beautiful kind of culture of decoration, culture of painting, symbols, star symbols, or flowers, or text. And I looked at this photograph. It's a very beautiful photograph. And I was thinking, what is actually written here? What is written on the wall? And I asked a friend to translate it. And he came back to me and said, it's a very rare blessing, obscure blessing, that goes back to Talmudic times, and it's about dreams. It's in fact about the interpretation of dreams, and more specifically, it's about how to turn a nightmare into a good dream. And I thought, this is exactly what we want to do. We want to turn a nightmare into a good dream. In the ceiling, you have a painting, and you see a lot of flowers. And these are not just random flowers. Of course, they reference the painted synagogues from 16th, 17th century that you just saw. But the pattern is arranged in a very specific way. Every flower is a star, and every star is a flower. What you see, in fact, on the ceiling is the star constellation of September 29th, 1941. What you see when you look up into the synagogue is exactly the star constellation that was visible on the night that the mass murder took place. It's, in a way, the last thing that the Jews saw before they were shot. So this painting plays, of course, with beauty, but it also has the connection to the terrible events, and it anchors the building very precisely in one space in place and one day in time. We painted it over a long period. It took many, many weeks or months, and then it was completed. The whole building is made of wood. Wood is very important for me in this case because it's, in a way, the antithesis to concrete. It's the most fragile material. Now, with concrete, you can be sure 500 years later, you can still come back to the same memorial. Nothing will have happened. Nothing will have changed. With wood, you need to care about it every day. You need to be careful with the wood. You need to protect it. You need to caress it. You need to treat it. You need to clean it. So wood has a fragility that you need to take care of that building every day. And for me, this is very important because taking care of something every day is, in fact, the activity of remembrance, of kind of remembering something very active. This is my wonderful wife and my beautiful son on the day of inauguration, and I show this not because of vanity, but I was commissioned with the building exactly like a week after my son was born. And I was reading about these terrible events, these events that show us this kind of the darkest side that what we as people are capable of. I was reading about eyewitness reports that make you shiver and cry. And at the same time, my little son was lying next to me, and he was so happy to be alive. And he was so happy to be on this world and to enjoy our wonderful planet that I thought, he's really teaching me something, that this building cannot be about death. It has to be about life. It has to celebrate the beauty of life. Only then the Nazis will not have won. Only then we really acknowledge that we are in the present time. So I really thank my little boy to have taught me something very important. So the building does physically open. It takes many people to do that. I will speed up and I will close very soon. It takes about 20 minutes to open. It's a physical process. It takes also strength. And I think it's not just to press a button. It's also a little bit of a spectacle, of course. It's a celebration of opening this to the public. So we open, the column comes out, I go a bit faster. Then the reading platform, the so-called Bima and Aron HaKodesh folds out, and then the balcony for the women folds out. It was inaugurated eventually on the 5th of October 2021, the 80th anniversary, or just a few days after the 80th anniversary of the massacre. I was fortunate enough to show the President of Ukraine, of Israel, and of Germany the building. This photograph looks like it's from another planet. We know the guy in kind of green t-shirt now with a beard. A few days after the beginning of the Ukraine war, rockets hit the site of Babin Yar, killing 5 people just 200 meters away from the synagogue. It's an incredibly cynical act to bring war to the site of mass murder again, but maybe it's also typical in a way that war always comes back to the places where there was war before. So this is kind of the, just to contextualize where we are, 5 people were killed in the sports center. This is 200 meters from the Babin Yar synagogue. The building survived, it's not damaged, and of course, the loss of every life is so much more important than the loss of a building. And it's such a tragedy what is occurring in the Ukraine, but also what is occurring all over kind of Eastern Europe at the moment. But in a way, there's another, let's say, victim of this. There's another thing that was lost. Not only all the lives were lost, but also, let's say, ambiguity was lost. Now, what this building stands for, in a way, is fragility, ambiguity, colorfulness, shades of the rainbow and shades of gray. Now we have stepped into a world where we need to choose. You're either black or you're white. You're either left or you're right. You're either this or you're that. And this is something that really shocks me or pains me, that we lose all the colorfulness and we can now only choose this side or that side. And this is one of the, for me, intellectually, some of the biggest victim, or the biggest victim of the war, intellectually I'm speaking, that all the colorfulness is gone. And the fragility is not a value anymore, but now it's only about harshness. Thank you for your attention.